Welcome to Conversation on Value, a podcast on Traces and Dreams about reframing value in business and society. I'm your host, Valeria Maltoni. In this episode, we'll explore the question of value in dignity with Donna Hicks. Dr. Hicks is associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. Conversation on Value is a podcast about how to reframe value in business and society. I'm Valeria, and I've been working on the question of value for more than 20 years. Welcome, Donna. Thank you so much for making the time. And my first question is, what is dignity?
Well, that's a good place to start. What is dignity? I asked myself that question many times, and I did hours and hours of research trying to come up with a really good definition of what is dignity. And after a lot of thinking, I decided that dignity, however I defined it, it had to be a simple definition. I wanted anybody and everybody to be able to understand what I was talking about. So after reading all of the literature and theology and philosophy and, listening to all the back and forths between the scholars, I said, you know what? I'm not going to make this complicated. My definition is going to be that dignity is our inherent, inborn value and worth. And at the same time, it's our inborn vulnerability to having that dignity assaulted and trampled upon. So, when I defined it that way, I had even little kids who understood, okay, yeah, I know, I was born worthy. I'm born with value. Yes, of course you are. And that's my message, just to get people to think and accept the fact that they have inborn, when the day they come into this earth, they have dignity and they never lose it, no matter what. That's my main message, really. That's how I want people to walk away thinking about their dignity.
I like that definition because in it contains the why it's important.
Say more. Why
is dignity important, right? Because humans have inherent value and worth.
Yes, that's it. You got it. That's it. And I'll tell you, Valeria, so many people with whom I work struggle over that notion that I have value. Nobody ever told them that you are worthy no matter what. You may make mistakes. You may hurt other people. You may do harm. But at the end of the day, you still have value, and you can still make it right. Whatever it is that you've done wrong, or you've hurt, whatever the damages you might have done in a relationship with others, you can make it right. And that's also the message about dignity, that we're all going to make mistakes and hurt people. And at the same time, if we just do a little bit of learning and then make a little bit of effort in understanding all of the layers of dignity, if we pay attention to it, then we will be able to right the wrong and reconnect with people. So that's another big message right there. Even though I consider myself, it's funny, I always say this, Valeria, I consider myself recovering dignity violator. Like the alcoholics, I'm a recovering dignity violator. And I think all of us are, we've all, whether we meant to or not, we've trampled on each other's sense of worth. So, but the good news is we can do something about it.
I suppose it's because of lack of awareness. One of the things that I liked about your book when I read it was this idea that we need to understand our own dignity and care for our own dignity. You want to tell me more about this concept of it's not just about us towards others, but it's us about towards ourselves.
Yes, and I had the good fortune to be mentored and to work with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And he taught me about this profoundly. I mean, he said to me once when we were working up in Northern Ireland, he asked me to tell him how I decided I wanted to research dignity and how I got interested in it. And I explained to him that my background, is in international conflict, and these people that I were working with, trying to get them to, sign agreements to end their conflicts. Most of them felt that their dignity had been robbed from them, that their dignity had been, what they use a specific word, had been stripped. That's what they say, that their dignity had been stripped. And when I said this to the Archbishop, he said, "What do you mean they felt their dignity has been stripped?" And I said, yeah, they felt like their dignity had been stripped from them by the other side, and they're fighting. One of the reasons they're fighting is to try to regain their dignity. And he said to me, "Donna, don't perpetuate that myth. Don't let people think that somebody has the power to strip them of their dignity." And he said to me, "How do you think we survived apartheid in South Africa? How do you think we, survived every single day of being humiliated and treated as less than?" And he said, "We survived because we knew that we had dignity and that nobody can touch it. Nobody could take it away." He said, "Yes, dignity can be injured. It can be assaulted, just like we experienced every day in South Africa." He said, "But at the end of the day, we knew that nobody could take that God-given, dignity from us." And, when I thought about that, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so profound, because I used to think before I had this conversation with him that, yeah, somebody could take our dignity away. And he said, nope, as he said, it can be injured and you have to heal from those injuries. But nobody but you is in charge of your dignity. And I kept thinking about that. And it just, came to me that, wow, if I really embraced that idea that my dignity is going to be in my hands and nobody could take, no matter how people have treated me, I am going to be okay. I just knew it, because that knowledge of your worth becomes your source of resilience and your source of being able to bounce back when someone, treats you badly. So it has been, the most, as I said, profound learning that I received from him. And, again, I tell this story to everybody because I want them to know that, because it is so powerful. It's like accepting your power, that you have within you. And, but boy, that's number one. Before you can really be an effective, let's say you want to lead people. I wrote a book about leading with dignity too. Imagine if you accepted that you had dignity no matter what, and that even if somebody mistreated you terribly, you were going to be okay. That message alone could move mountains, And that's the very first lesson. Like you said, it's the very first thing that we have to learn about dignity, that we have it. And then, because once we have it, it's so easy to treat other people, so much easier to treat other people with dignity, because you're absolutely right. That awareness of our own dignity comes first. And then it feels even natural to think about other people having it as well, because I'm a human, you're a human, everybody else is human, so we all must have dignity, but you first have to feel it.
I love how you came to the idea of dignity by observing people during conflict resolution conversations.
Yeah.
And you were listening to the actual conversation that we're having. But then you also expressed that there was a subtext, there was another conversation going on. You want to give us some examples, on the ground examples of
that happened everywhere, Valeria. Everywhere I went as a conflict resolution facilitator and mediator. And I was all over the place. I was in the Middle East with Israel, Palestine. I was in Sri Lanka on the other side of the world. In South America, I worked on the Colombian conflict, as I said, Northern Ireland. I mean, and many, many others. I did US-Cuba dialogues for several years. And one of the things that I've always assumed about conflict is that every conflict has its unique elements. You know, it's just like culture. Every culture has its unique elements, and you have to understand that and you have to learn that. And then at the same time, I realized, oh my goodness, there's something common also. You know, both truths are kind of there at the same time. Your conflict is unique, but there's something that's really happening at this table that tells me that all of them are the same. And that truth was that, like you said, there were two conversations going all the time. They were talking on one level at the table. They were talking about the political issues that divided them. But then, because I'm a psychologist and I'm tuned into what people don't say, also, I realized there was this other conversation taking place under the table, and it was a highly emotional content to this conversation. You know, people would be talking about the politics, and all of a sudden somebody would burst into anger and, you know, even push away from the table and get all upset. And I thought, oh my goodness, what was that about? Because it wasn't really obvious what, you know, in the conversation, what triggered that kind of a emotional reaction. So no matter where I went, it was the same thing. They would be talking about the political issues at the table, but this whole emotional tsunami also was happening under, and it was derailing all of our best efforts to try to reach an agreement. And so, you know, it was at that point, I think I was in Sri Lanka doing one of these dialogues, and I saw the same thing happen. And I thought to myself, okay, you know what? If they were to put words to this non-verbal conversation, that emotional outburst that came through, I said, if they were to put words to that emotional outburst, it would be something like, how dare they treat us this way? You know, don't you see that we're suffering? Can't you see we're human beings? And I remember this word dignity popped into my head that, yeah, this is about their dignity, about being treated in a way that doesn't even recognize their humanness. So that's how it all started. And then from that insight, I started doing my research and looking into this concept of dignity. And lo and behold, no one had written about it in terms of conflict and trying to resolve conflict. But it's, you know, Valeria, it's that human dimension. We've all experienced it. When someone treats us wrong, we get upset. I mean, it's a natural human reaction to being treated as if you don't matter. So it was everywhere. I saw it, you know, in my relationships, you know, other than in the international world. I saw it everywhere I looked once I had that insight.
It's interesting because I think what you're saying is that it's the common thread in the context of relationships.
That's what I would. Beautiful. Can I quote you? That was.
No, actually, I think it came from reading your work. So.
Well, I don't know. Well, you read it well then.
So how do we, so you talked about conflict, and there's certainly a lot of conflict today, and it's almost being written in culture. Like the culture is becoming filled with conflict, and we don't even notice it anymore, like water all around us. And so how do we reprogram our old patterns in conflict resolution to take this insight that you had into account about dignity?
It's not something most people think about when they think, wow, I'm in conflict with this person. And, They always think about the surface issues. Like in the business, we call it the presenting problem. Like, for example, let's say you're in the workplace and your boss, let's say you're Valeria, and your boss has decided to promote someone else to a position that you knew very well you're most qualified for, and you weren't even interviewed for this. And so there is this, reaction, and lo and behold, the person that your boss put in that position is a man. All right. So there's this gender issue there. Did I not get that job because that promotion because I'm a woman? And so what was going on there? And it feels like such an affront. It feels so unfair. And I mean, I've confronted this a lot in my consulting in the workplace, that there are so many, gender and pay is another big one. But that's I'm only choosing gender because it was, just popped in my head. But there's so many ways for people to feel unseen and unheard and unrecognized. And it's just, it's just one of those things that if we do develop an awareness, as you pointed out, and recognize that this treating each other in a way that actually recognizes our mutual value and worth, it takes a little practice, because honestly, what comes naturally to us is to lash back and try to get even and all of those things. And so what we have to do is unlearn some behaviors that are getting us into trouble. But we first, even before all that, have to recognize we are in trouble. Number one, there is a problem in our relationship, and the dignity framing, it helps people so much in thinking about why my relationship with this person makes me feel so bad. It might be my boss, it might be my coworker, it might be my spouse, who knows? But the whole idea is that once you start thinking about dignity, and not only the way you're being treated, but how you're treating the other people as well. So for me, at this juncture, having done this work with people for well over a decade, 2 decades, really, I realized that this dignity work is really about accountability, how to right the wrong, how to say, I'm sorry, I violated your dignity. I'm looking back and thinking about how I treated you in that staff meeting the other day. And I'm thinking that I might have, really messed up and violated your dignity. That's what we need to be doing, taking responsibility for the harm that we may have caused others. And certainly learning how to approach people who we feel have violated our dignity. So what is that dance like? What does that one look like?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm mindful of you had like a dignity 10 as you had come up. You talked about accountability, but you had other items on that list that helped a little bit, because I feel that, yes, at the high level, once you talk about the concept, we get it, we become aware of it. Yeah. But then how do you put a framework around, what words do you give people as instruments, as tools to think through the kind of things that they need to think about to spot violations or to reclaim their own dignity?
So there, I spend a lot of time doing trainings in this, and especially training leaders, people who are, leading big groups of employees and so on. And what I tell them, number one, they have to not only themselves go through what I call a dignity education phase of the training. And by that, I mean that first and foremost, everybody has to understand the language of dignity, that what I call the basic building blocks. And what you were just referring to, I call the 10 elements of dignity, which really means 10 ways that we can have our dignity honored, or on the flip side of it, 10 ways we can have our dignity violated. So I'll just tell you, though, first of all of us want our identity accepted, no matter who we are, our race, our religion. We don't like to be thought of as either inferior or superior. We need to be recognized that we're all equal in dignity, no matter what our identity is. We all want to be recognized when, let's just say, we do a great job at our workplace, and our boss comes up to us and says, "Hey, Valeria, you just made a huge contribution with this project. Thank you." That's recognition. People want that kind of recognition when they work hard at something. Also, people want to feel safe. This is a big one. This is a huge one. Safety is a big one, especially in organizations and in the work environment. Then it's not just physically safe, it's psychologically safe. They want to, and I'll say more about that in a minute, but also people want acknowledgement. Here's another big lesson from Archbishop Tutu. He told me, when people have been roughed up, they need acknowledgement for the suffering that they've endured. So that's a big one, acknowledgement. People want inclusion. I mean, we've got diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings everywhere here in the United States now. Everybody knows that sense of wanting to belong, to feel like you're a part of something. So inclusion's another one. Understanding. People want to be understood. People hate it when they're negatively judged before someone really understands what their perspective is. Fairness. This is a simple one. Fairness. People want to be treated fairly with equity. Okay, and people want to be given the benefit of the doubt. They want to have people assume that they're trustworthy until proven otherwise. So all of these things taken together, it was really interesting. I asked one group of employees I worked with at a big corporation what the most common dignity violation was in their workplace. And for me, I was expecting them to say something about identity. They didn't want to be discriminated against, or I thought maybe they'd say something about fairness or recognition, but no. 80% of the respondents said they didn't feel safe. I said, "What? You don't feel safe in your workplace? What does that mean?" And they said, no, it's not physically we didn't feel safe, but we don't feel safe to speak up when something bad happens at work. We're afraid to confront our boss, or we're afraid to say something to our colleagues. So to me, that was, I don't know about you, if that shocks you, but I thought that was pretty extraordinary, that the number one violation they felt was that they couldn't speak up when something bad happened. So there you have it. So giving people that language really helps. But even before that, Valeria, one thing that I'm really convinced changes people's minds about why dignity is so important is a piece of research that I share with everybody I work with. And that research has to do with what's happening inside our brain when we experience a dignity violation. So I explored the research on social neuroscience. There were two neuroscientists out in UCLA, Naomi Eisenberg and Matt Lieberman. They did a study about social pain. And so I thought this was fascinating. What they did was they put people in these brain scans. You lay them down and you wire them up so that you can see what their brain activity is. And what they did was they exposed people to different scenarios. One was when someone had, they had like a movie screen, up above them when they were lying down. And they had this one scenario was when someone broke an arm and fell or broke something, had some physical injury. And they looked in the brain to see that the part of the brain that was activated during that injury, the visualization of that injury, was the ancient pain center. It's the area called the limbic system. It's where we experience, all of our intense emotions. The fight and flight response comes from there. And And that wasn't so surprising, but the surprising part was that when they were exposed to, someone violating each other's dignity, which they called social pain, that the same area of the brain was activated as if the person was experiencing a physical injury. So in the end, the brain doesn't know the difference between a dignity violation and pain that's caused by a physical injury. So when I take this stuff into an executive leadership team, for example, to try to convince the people that learning about dignity is absolutely critically important, because you'd never allow people to walk around punching each other in the workplace and, breaking each other's, limbs. You'd never allow that. So because the brain it reacts the same way to a dignity violation, we've got to pay attention to this. This is serious. And that's all it takes.
I wanted to talk a little bit about that, or summarize a little bit of the things that you've just said, because it's really important. So the limbic areas of our brain are really the areas that store information for the longer time. And so when we break an arm, for example, or when something happens to us that is a serious injury, we remember that for a long time. Why? It's a life-saving skill, because then we don't go and do the same thing that we did that caused that breakage. And so we have this kind of understanding. We've had this kind of understanding for physical injuries for a long time, but we've overlooked this whole dimension of the emotional impact that our action has on others. And this research is important because it gives us evidence that it's not fluff, it's not supposition. It really does happen. And I imagine when you talk to these executives, yes, there is a consideration in terms of what happens inside the organization, but there is also a thought of what happens when we treat our customers poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens when we're not responsive, or we also make even better our responses through a system that doesn't really have this ability. Because as humans, once we create this awareness, we have the ability to parse the information. But the machines, so far, don't read emotions.
Right. So far.
So one of the things that you've wrote about that was really interesting to me was that not only there are these 10 elements that can put words around how we help understand and identify elements of or phases, aspects of dignity, but also there are temptations that we should be careful to stay away from. And I would love for you to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, as I explained to you in the beginning, when I was researching this book, my first book, I was looking everywhere for answers. And what I was curious about was exploring the idea that I might have found something that's unique to every human being, that because we're always looking for the differences, and that we're always looking, and which are important critically, like the whole diversity consciousness that we're trying to develop too, and cultural consciousness. So all that stuff is really important. So anyway, while I was researching all this, the question that I was asking myself is, what am I missing about what it means to be human? What am I missing? Because I saw this desire for dignity, this reaction to being treated badly everywhere I went. And I said to myself, is there something else happening here? Besides all of us wanting to be treated with dignity, is there something else common to our shared humanity? And I discovered this literature in evolutionary biology. it was an eye-opener to me, because what these people do, what these scientists do, is they study the human species. They don't look at, the difference between North Americans, South Americans, Asians, or Africans and Europeans. They don't do that. What they look at is the level of the human species. Scientists, biologists study the nervous system, they study the circulatory system, and all human beings look like that, have those different biological, pathways and everything. But we tend socially to not to think that there are also things that we're biologically pre-programmed to do, that are in our brains, that we inherited from our early ancestors. And that's what these biologists look at. They look for these involuntary responses that we have when we're feeling threatened. So under circumstances of threat, what these biologists have shown, we have common reactions, and they're programmed from way back in our brains. It's all in our heads. So what happens is, let's say somebody comes at us and threatens us, and first thing we do is we get defensive. We might want to get even. Let's say it's a dignity violation. We have this desire to take the bait. I call it taking the bait, and trying to return the harm, trying to get even, retaliation. Oh, it's rampant in the international community with conflicts in the international world. So all those conflicts I worked on for so many years, this desire for revenge was so powerful. And then I kept reading, and I realized that there were others, like people wanting to save face when they were exposed. Let's say they made a mistake, or politicians do this all the time. What they do is lie. They try to cover it up. They try to convince people that, that's not true. And this is one of our biggest problems right now in the world, I think, this face saving, not admitting to making a mistake. And so that's another big one. People don't take responsibility when they cause others harm. We hate conflict. People do not like confrontation. We don't like that at all. We'd rather just sit there and take it than, actually going up to your boss and saying, hey, you just violated my dignity in that staff meeting. We don't like that. We'll rather avoid it. We avoid confrontation. There's others like we blame and shame others to deflect our guilt. And one really funny one, I think, is gossip, because we have programmed in our brains that we need to alert everybody about, somebody who is potentially harmful. And well, the problem with gossip is that, let's just say, you're afraid to confront your boss over a dignity violation that you experience from them. And you say, I've got to go tell Donna. I've got to call up Donna and tell her what happened here. And then, everybody you've called up to get, because we need soothing, we need to be soothed. But what happens in a work environment, that kind of gossip network, it is like pollutes the culture. It pollutes the culture because nobody's confronting each other. They're all just going around talking behind everybody else's back. And there was some colleagues that I found some literature that said gossip is the lowest cost form of punishment. And I just thought that was so great. But anyway, so we are pre-programmed to have these reactions, but these reactions are not very dignified. In fact, they're the opposite. And so our challenge here is, and this is what our biologists tell us, they say, biology is not destiny unless we ignore it. So all of these temptations that we have to react so strongly, and they're often unconscious reactions. We react strongly to them, but they get us into trouble down the road. They get us into trouble in our relationships. If we're taking the bait all the time, we're constantly in fights with other people. Or if we don't say we're sorry and shirk responsibility, we'll never repair our relationships. So these guys tell us, we all have to understand that these involuntary survival, they're survival responses. They were first initiated back in the 100,000 years ago. And our brains have just, like you said, when you get those really profoundly frightening experiences, they stay in our brain. They don't go away. So anyway, that's what I call the 10 temptations to violate our own dignity, not to mention the dignity of others.
So it's interesting because one of the in the group that stood out for me was assuming innocent victimhood.
Oh, I forgot that one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it stood out for me because it's so nuanced. It's so subtle that it's not obvious, right? And so we we feel sorry for ourselves, right? And so that feeling sorry prevents us from being a go-getter, going and figuring out what is it that we have done that, what attitude or behavior can we change to see the light or to understand better what's going on, which goes back then to your elements, the understanding. When you were talking about the elements, particularly when you were talking about understanding and fairness, they are a little bit squishy for people as kind of concepts. And so one of the things that I thought about to bringing home a long time ago, I did some training as part of corporate work. And we watched the movie. I don't even remember the title of the movie now, but it's the 12 Jurors.
Oh, yes, I remember that one.
12 Angry Men.
12 Angry Men.
That's the 12 Angry Men. And it was enough for one person to have self-awareness and to have awareness of dignity and give the benefit of the doubt to the one young man for a new dynamic to happen in that room. And I thought that movie was masterful in explaining some of these subtle things that happen. Yes. Interpersonal dynamics, because they're so hard to catch when they're happening, because we and the speed at which business happens today, meetings, decisions, and so there is a lot of collateral that happens when we don't pause and reflect, and so I thought that was a good. That was a good example. And I was curious about, how do you know when your dignity has been violated?
Well, usually what happens is you end up walking away feeling bad, inside, you have this negative feeling like, what just happened to me there? Wait a minute, I don't like the way I was just, you have to check in with your own body. Because there is this physical aspect to a dignity violation. Usually it comes in the form of feeling humiliated or feeling like a shame reaction, or and the other interesting thing about humiliation, that too is a natural reaction, one of those temptations that people hate feeling humiliated. All right, that's one of those basic human phenomena that nobody likes experiencing that kind of, exposure. And so it feels, it just, you walk away feeling bad. Maybe it isn't as extreme as humiliation, or maybe even a little bit of shame, but you don't feel 100% safe in that situation. You'd rather, your guard goes up, your shield comes up. And you just basically walk away thinking, what happened? And what's so helpful to a lot of people is having those 10 elements of dignity to check against and say, well, what happened here? Was I being treated unfairly there? Yes, I was. Was I not given the benefit of the doubt? Yes, that happened too. Or do I feel like I was discriminated against because I'm whatever, and the person might say, yeah, because, usually when these experiences of a dignity violation happen, it's more than just one of those elements. Often it's a cluster of those elements happening all at the same time. And, finally, did I get any acknowledgement for what just happened? Of course I did not, So all of these questions you can ask yourself with those 10 elements of dignity. What happened? Well, let's just go through the list. Let's go. And the worst dignity violations, usually all of them are present.
Oh, wow.
But your first signal is how your body reacts. You know, you get that. Sometimes people get a rapid heartbeat when they've been, injured, their dignity has been injured, or you might turn red, or, a lot of different physical reactions for different people, but there is a physical response, and you end up feeling not great. And you walk away thinking something's wrong.
It's interesting that you would say about the body, because I feel, and definitely Sir Ken Robinson has done great work on that, right? I feel that we educate the head, or we train the head rather, and then our body becomes a transport system for the head or the brain, right? But there is so much that happens in the body that if we were connected with our senses and we were connected with ourselves, we would orient much better in life.
Well, that's part of being human, So every talk that I give, if I'm doing a keynote or something, I start out, the first slide is a quote by John Nesbitt, and it says on the slide, "The greatest breakthrough of the 21st century will not occur because of technology, but because of a better understanding of what it means to be human." And that quote sent me on this quest, because I felt like I had an understanding about one aspect of what it means to be human, how we all want to be treated with dignity, all of us. Every human wants that. And exploring the different layers of that, like that understanding dignity and understanding our body's reaction to having our dignity assaulted, it can be a subtlety for some people, Valeria, who aren't used to, tuning into your body. But you can learn that. We humans can learn that. We tend to shut it down. The defensive reaction, our psychological defense is to shut down those bodily reactions. But we can unlearn that. We can learn how to pay attention to the subtle cues that our body is giving us about, I just wasn't treated well back there, and I need to do something. I need to, get help.
So to tune in. So from the awareness. So you mentioned that you've written a book about leading with dignity, which that's another important piece, right? And I know that you consider leaders, everybody, right? Because we lead ourselves and then we lead others. So you're not talking just about the quote unquote leadership, but you're talking about the situations when we're called to leading. And what has been the most surprising part of the research that you've done for that book?
I think hands down, the most surprising finding that I uncovered was the level of ignorance that most human beings have around this issue of dignity. I have an Ecuadorian friend who says that, Donna, the ignorance surrounding dignity is encyclopedic, he said. But it's true. And people who are very highly trained, people who are PhDs and have MBAs and are working in organizations, people with very sophisticated intellectual capacities, they never learned this anywhere. Where have you learned this in school? I mean, right now, I've got young kids at the age of kindergarten who are being exposed to dignity. Can you imagine what the next generation is going to be like? It's going to be great. But our generation and people older than us even, they never learn this. I mean, I think we have to add to our learning our ABCs, we have to add a D there, ABCD for dignity. We have to learn that from a young age. And so they were good people. I have met some of the most wonderful people doing these dignity leadership trainings. And I can tell you that good people with good intentions violate dignity if they don't understand this stuff. And so the simple message to people is learn this. I spent 5 years out of my life writing this book for you. Learn it, take it, read it, learn it, because this will be one of the most invaluable pieces of reading you've done in a long time, because you're not going to find it in your MBA training or when you get your, degrees, all these other intellectual degrees. So that was the really the biggest. And again, good people. I'm not talking about people who are monsters. I'm talking good people with good intentions will violate dignity with this without knowing what it means and how it affects people.
It's funny. My grandmother used to say, hell is paved with good intentions.
Definitely. I remember that one.
So you mentioned children, and I imagine that children with their inborn curiosity are probably a good group of humans to talk about these issues of dignity, because they are eager to not only learn but understand, and there is a sense of also playfulness. When we're children, we're not afraid to make mistakes. Yeah. We test the boundaries of things a little bit, and it's good that there is this work going on with children, because then we become what the narrative has created as teenagers, and those are the troubling years. Yeah, because we, in general, humans as teenagers withdraw a little bit, and it goes underground. Our issues, our questions, they go a little bit underground because there's this desire to craft our own identity, or identity is changing. So I'm glad that you're doing the work with the children.
Well, the thing about children, which, I've studied human development with, in my PhD is in human development, and I studied Piaget, and Jean Piaget, the famous French child cognitive psychologist. What I learned from observing these children, young children, when I was doing some of these trainings for their teachers and for them, was that they experience the world through their bodies. Their mind isn't developed yet. It isn't, little kids. Even little kids as young as, 3 or 4 years old know inside their bodies what it's like to be treated badly, by their caretakers, by their siblings, they have that inner sense of knowing. And unfortunately, when we develop our cognitive capacities, when our brain skills start developing, we move away from that inner knowledge. Remember, we were just talking about the checking in with your body to find out what is going on inside. That's what they know so well, because they experience the world through their bodily sensations, because they don't have the meaning-making structures in their brains yet, these little ones. So that's why it's so important to have them understand, and they do. Oh my gosh, they know when they're being mistreated. They'll cry and run away, and if there's a bully in the classroom, their knowledge of what those inner reactions are is superior to ours. I'm serious.
We should spend more time with children.
We should. Yes. Yeah. They are natural dignity agents, these kids.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Donna. I look forward to future explorations around dignity and future research. And to everybody who's listening, please make sure that you grab a copy of Leading with Dignity. It took a long time to research and to put together, and it will be a useful tool for sure.
Well, thank you so much for your really insightful questions. And it makes such a difference to have someone who has read the book and knows the material. So this was so much fun for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. You've been listening to and watching Conversation on Value. I'm your host, Valeria Maltoni. I hope you'll join us again for our next conversation on Traces and Dreams. If you like this episode, please subscribe to Traces and Dreams on YouTube.